Hello, everyone, and welcome to the weekly Kubernetes Sig Docs meeting. Today is Tuesday, September 18th, 2018, and we are here to do all the docs all the time. So let's start. Yes. Let's start with new contributors. I see Dominic. Welcome back. It's good to see you again. I noticed that we have someone who looked new to me. AGV, you want to say hello? Oh, sorry, you are muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a little low, but yeah.
Yeah, Andrew invited me. I'm a customer engineer, and I'm working on Kubernetes documentation as well. So, hello.
Awesome. What is your name?
It's AGV. Alexandrina or AGV.
Excellent. Well, welcome, AGV. Right. New folks. Yep. All right. Let's move on to updates and reminders. He's not in the meeting, but I think Brad Topol may get something like a wartime service medal for being the PR wrangler during a hurricane. He did it and survived. He offered, or I offered on Tuesday to take over his PR shift last week while he was, Florence was barreling down on his house, and he's like, as long as I have power, I have nothing else to do. This is actually good. It's a good way to pass the time. So he cleared PRs last week in gale force winds. So special thank you to Brad. And a reminder, this week's PR Wrangler is Jennifer Rondeau. And I am happy to jump in and help out as needed. Let's see, and if you have any questions about if you are a maintainer and you have any questions about when you are scheduled next, there's a link to the weekly PR Wrangler schedule in the wiki in the meeting notes. Okay, let's move on to the agenda. 112, all things 112. I noticed that, whoops, I slipped on a 112 and my date is now out. Zach, do you want to give us an update on 1.12?
Sure thing. 112 is happening. It's in full steam. I think this is the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks of the release. Ideally by this Friday, the milestone is actually today, but I'm giving people who would like to have conversations until Friday. And then I'm going to merge everything in. I had to back out core DNS, which is a bummer, but now it looks like based on the discussion from the release meeting today, I may be backing it back in. Depending on how, so right now scalability tests for 5,000 and greater node clusters are causing out-of-memory errors for core DNS. So it looks like it can't go in 112 unless they fix it, or SIG autoscaling says this is an acceptable bug, and as long as we have something like in a dot release very quickly, then it'll be fine. I ended up accidentally hitting the tripwire that restarted the branching discussion with maintainers. I have been periodically updating master through the git merge strategy, which creates a merge commit. And that, yes, I'm sure Zach will be able to discuss this as he continues to look at his, oh, you don't want to do it, okay.
It's fine.
The long and short of it is, by far, as far as heterogeneity is concerned, as our contributors and contributions are concerned, they are very wide and very diverse, and very much so. It's like trail mix. If you took enough time, you could split everything back out into its individual components.
Zach, I'm sorry, I'm laughing, but the heterogeneity and trail mix, I can't wait to see where this is going.
Okay, sorry. Basically what I'm saying is, because the difference between a heterogeneous mixture and a homogeneous mixture is a homogeneous mixture, once you mix it, it's mixed. Nothing else can happen. Heterogeneous is like trail mix, at least that's what it's taught in chemistry. You can split everything back out into its original ingredients at the end. That is the way that our contributions and contributors go, as far as translators, blog posts, case studies, actual release running, and then general bug fix, typos, and what I call drive-by contributions, which is someone adding one letter, forgetting to sign the CLA, and then never hearing from them again. So with all of that, we can separate all those people back out, and each of them would require its own release strategy. And we don't actually have I don't, nor would I at this point imagine one that exists, but we don't have a unified release strategy with this. That's where the heterogeneity code is going. But basically, contributors have reached out to me personally and discussed with our release process. And I'm, barring, they've offered suggestions, but unless we move to a release cadence of, once every time Kubernetes is released, then I don't know that we could necessarily adopt any of the same principles that they would have. But I'm open for discussion, and that's the end of my soliloquy. 112 is going great.
So who are some of the people you've talked to that have registered?
This time, because it's been various different contributors. This time it's been mostly Lubomir Ivanov, who his tag is neolit123.
Have you heard from Daniel Smith or Jordan Leggett?
No, I was going to say Jordan has not popped his head up, but he also hasn't put a PR in. So
okay, because in the past they've been pretty vocal, and it seems like they have, they think they have the answer for us, and so I'd sure like to, to hear proposals from
and
them.
I totally want to learn too.
Yeah,
I think the and this is what I was explaining, like the broad diversity of content and types of people that contribute to our repositories. Basically, I don't know that there's a strategy that will keep everyone happy. There's just a strategy that will work so far.
Right.
So the TLDR is basically Lubomir had the same reaction that some developers do at realizing that our strategy is kind of a mirror inverse of KK, and that there are reasons for that, and that there is not an easy or easily preferable solution to changing a release strategy. That what we do works very well for who we serve. I think Lubomir was frustrated because he had an open PR that he had to rebase because of a merge from an upstream PR. And as anything happens that's sort of annoying, he wondered whether it were possible to not be annoyed by it in the future. And the answer is, well, what we have right now is minimally annoying for the most amount of people. And if you know of a way to make it even less annoying, we're certainly open to it. But you're not the first, and we're still open to hearing it. So Zach handled it very well. As always, we're open to a better technical improvement in our branching and release strategy. But I think what we have works. So welcome, Brad. Your combat service medal for PR wrangling in adverse weather will be in the mail shortly.
I don't deserve it. I only did a couple days. I'm sorry. I'll make up for it.
Please don't make up for it. Please just be safe.
Yeah, we were very lucky in my area. It wasn't so bad, so it was good. I mean, it was bad, but it wasn't like the rest of the state. So,
cool. So, Zach, thank you very much for continuing to wrangle 1.12. I look forward to doing a retrospective at the end, because I think you've done some really, really cool things with the process for future release meisters. Make folks' lives a lot easier. Cool. All right. Andrew and Dominic, do you want to talk about fun with modeling?
Yeah, so just to give a little context, if any of you guys are fans of Big Bang Theory, like Sheldon Cooper has this like fun with flags segment he does periodically. So I thought it'd be fun to have one for modeling. because we've kicked off the Fundamental Modeling Concepts project with Dominic, who's here. So we're going to just start doing like a regular cadence and just show little bits of like things that we're trying to clarify and make sure, you know, concepts and definitions are crisp. So this is our first iteration at this, our first segment, I guess. So Dominic.
Hey, thank you. So let me just dive in and see how I can share my screen. Actually, how can I share my screen?
There's like a
share button
in the bottom middle. Yeah.
Duh. All right. Can you see my screen? Wonderful.
Yeah.
So before we get into fun with modeling, we do a 3-minute meta presentation that answers the question, what is a model, right? And in this context, a model is an abstraction of a system so that each fact about the model is also a fact about the system. So the reader may expect that every fact that he or she may derive from the model is also a fact that is derivable from the system. As a little example, we have a system on the right side, an electrical circuit, and we have an abstraction, a circuit diagram. So in this case, the facts about the model and the system are there is an electronic circuit with 2 components, a power source and a light bulb. However, there are additional facts about the system that are not captured in the model. So for example, in this case, it would be physical dimension, weight, operating temperature. You only can derive these facts if you study the system, but not the model. Now, we operate on the assumption that if 2 capable people study the same system, they will arrive at the same mental model. However, if one person studies the system and has to communicate his or her mental model via a system model, information transfer suffers from encoding loss. I may sloppily create a system model, may forget some details, I may not explain it well. And it also suffers from encoding loss, which means that as a receiver...
Decoding loss.
Decoding loss, correct, thank you. That as a receiver, I may not understand what was well explained to me, which results in the fact that for the first person, based on our operating assumption, capable person, the mental model matches the system, but for the second person, the mental model does not match the system at all, and therefore, second person cannot reason well about the system and its behavior. So what we are trying to do is to minimize encoding loss and decoding loss by complete and accurate conceptual models, and also, where applicable, complete and accurate formal models. So that sets the stage. And then we can jump right into fun with modeling. And today, I want to talk about imperative versus declarative. When we read about Kubernetes, or when we talk about Kubernetes, we usually state Kubernetes is a declarative system. And all of us have somewhat like a picture in mind, what does that actually mean, right? But if you ask somebody what does that mean, it is actually a concept that is hard to explain. So for this presentation, I want to look at a simple model of computation. And that is we transition through states over time. That is, we start in a state S, and applying a command C to state S transitions the system to S tick. Similarly, applying C tick to S tick transitions the system to S tick tick, and so forth. So here you see a structural diagram of the system that I previously explained. The automaton here is responsible for accepting a command and then transition the current state to the next state. Now, when we talk about declarative, let's start with imperative. In an imperative system, the user has a desired state in his or her head. I know where I want to be at. Yeah. And it is now the responsibility of the user to determine the set of commands that transitions the state of the system from the current state to the desired state. But you still see the command channel, the processor, and the state. Now, to contrast that with the declarative system, right, it is the system's responsibility to determine the set of commands that transition the state of the system from the system's current state to the desired state. And in the context of a declarative system, the desired state does not only exist in the user's head, it also exists in an encoded form as an input to the system. And now the system is split in two components, a controller and the already previously present processor. Now, in this context, we can define controller as a process that accepts a representation of the desired state and yields a set of commands that, when processed, transitions the current state of the system to the desired state of the system. But that still leaves us one question. We hear a lot about control loops as well. And currently, there is no loop in this, right? The controller does it once, the processor does it once, and we are in a blissful state eternally. Yeah. However, reality usually is not as fun. So a control loop then is a continuous process that accepts a representation of the desired state, determines a set of commands, and performs that set of commands to transition the current state of the system to the desired state of the system. In other words, a control loop is a controller that performs its function continuously, therefore compensating adverse state changes. Now, what's an adverse state change? Adverse state changes are all changes to the state that are not performed by the processor. Context of Kubernetes, container goes down, a node goes down, for example. Now, to summarize this, right? The difference of a declarative versus, of an imperative versus declarative system is who is the driver, right? In an imperative situation, I have the desired state in my head, and I am the driver of the system. In a declarative system, I have the desired state in my head, and the system has it as an input in an encoded form, and the system itself, or more specifically, a component of the system, is the driver of the system. And if we take that one step further, we actually see that this fits neatly into the world of Kubernetes, where I do not have only one controller, I have multiple controllers. The processor in this case is the API server that accepts commands and alters the Kubernetes object store, so the Kubernetes objects, accordingly. And the controllers act in a control loop, run continuously, and are therefore capable of reacting to adverse state changes, like a node goes down or a container goes down. And that concludes today's episode. I give you a little bit of an outlook for next week's episode, which is titled The Great Lie. We were talking about declarative versus imperative systems today and saw how Kubernetes is indeed a declarative system. But next week, we actually step down into the nitty-gritty details of Kubernetes and explore where there are actual mismatches in the mental model and also in the communication. When we say Kubernetes is a declarative system, where does this statement hold up and where does this statement not hold up? Thank you very much. Oh, actually, I want to take the chance, if you do not mind. I created a document, an RFC, a request for comments about a Kubernetes conceptual overview. So this is a high-level model of the structure of Kubernetes, its individual components and connections. If you don't mind, I would like to send this out later to everybody. And if you have any comments, concerns, please do comment to this request for comments.
So I'm going to add some instructions to the RFC to give a little context, because what we're looking for is technical accuracy. This is to help validate the models that Dominic is coming up with. So one, if you are familiar with the details of Kubernetes, like make sure it does reflect what you believe of the system, right? But then two, also like, does this help you understand Kubernetes better? Does this help clarify your mental model, that sort of thing? So those are the two main types of feedback we're looking for.
And Andrew, how do you plan to distribute? How do you plan to distribute this? Where will it be available?
So I was planning on sending a link to the Sig Docs email list, and then we can also send it more broadly to the engineers and the other Kubernetes email lists. And I can also put it on Slack.
Can you include me, Andrew?
Yes, definitely.
By the way, both of you, this is amazing. This was very beautiful.
Thank you.
A couple, excuse me, a couple questions. I agree, this is totally amazing. And Dominic, from your presentation, you implied that there's this week's episode, which implies next week's episode, and the following week's episode, which ends up being a lot of episodes, ultimately, and a lot of diagrammatic content. Mm-hmm. So the question is, what's the scope of diagrammatic content that we want to create, number one? And then number two, how does this turn into Kubernetes.io documentation? And how do we, what is an ideal way to package this in a way that allows the whole SIG to work on it?
So I can answer some of those. So as we're going through the work, I mean, we realize we need to clarify certain things like, for example, the imperative versus declarative, because that's a really foundational thing. So I will be, working on a doc plan that will, once, as we're encountering these things, we'll organize like what it is that we need to modify and add to the Kubernetes.io doc set. And then some of them could actually be blog posts. They don't necessarily have to be in the documentation. So we have to kind of determine, what the appropriate channel is for that. And then I think what I was going to propose after Dominic's presentation was to turn the working group that regularly meets on Friday to be the modeling group. So people can join in on that and we can figure out like, how, how we want to operate and like disseminate this and like, collaborate on this stuff.
That's great. I mean, it strikes me that the range of diagrams could grow to such a point that it becomes difficult to know which diagrams should go where or how to gracefully incorporate them. So having some kind of planful universe in the grain of sand for how this will turn into Kubernetes.io docs, I think will be a focusing function for everyone in the group.
Agreed. And there are also some. I think there are some procedural niceties that it would be good to include, like making sure that any text included in the diagrams can be made into a translatable string for translation projects, localization projects, things like that.
Yeah. So we're going to stick with the what's the vector format? SVG.
SVG.
Yeah. So we're going to stick with that as the output so that it can be translated. And we're also going to store the source files, the OmniGraffle files, into the repo once they're done. And that way, they can be reused and modified later.
Awesome.
Yeah, this is Raji. if we ever consider accessibility too, we will have to describe the model, the image in itself. So if there is a screen reader, and for people who are not able to see, the model they should be able to visualize it mentally.
Awesome.
Is this
Thank you for
something
keeping
that
that
you
in mind.
yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
No, thank you very much for thinking about accessibility. That's really important. Okay, cool. Other questions that folks have for Andrew and Dominic?
This is awesome. This would really help a lot of them. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And I'm sorry that I actually forgot the obligatory question. Are there any questions? And immediately went over to the RFC. I was just excited to get that out. So if anybody has actually any questions about the content of any of these two presentations, please do not be shy.
So if folks have questions during the week, what's the best way for folks to address questions to you, Dominic or Andrew?
I do not know how you generally operate, but I do not mind if you just shoot me an email at dominic.turner@sap.com. I am more than happy to take the feedback and also answer any questions.
And you can probably also reach me on Slack.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Dominic?
Well, if you do not mind for me to ask a question, so please do think about, as I think Andrew or Tom, yes, Tom stated, we can make this somewhat regular occurrence about, let's say, random topic, fun with modeling, all about Kubernetes. Please do let me know if you think this is viable for your time, or if you think that this meeting is not the correct stage for it.
I think it's great to have a presentation and review. I like Andrew's idea of having a working group specifically to dive in and have time that's more dedicated to the material itself. But in terms of reviewing progress and getting sort of a high-level overview, I think periodic updates in weekly meetings are great.
Cool.
All right, Dominic, if you don't mind, stop sharing your screen. Perfect, thank you. And talking about accessibility, Raji, I think you have some tool links for us to consider for accessibility.
Yes, Luke, he wanted me to check if there were any tools, free tools that we could use. And these were the two tools that I put up on the Sig Docs tooling channel are the two tools that seem to have some good reviews. All of you, I invite all of you to please take a look at it. Please post your suggestions, comments, or if you know of any other tools that would be better, you could suggest that as well. And after we review the tools, probably we could take it to the preview or try to integrate it with the build preview to get the report of a link checker and the accessibility tool. Thank you.
Sorry, I was just I pasted the links that Raji discussed for accessibility tools into chat. So yes, if folks are interested in accessibility, I would say let's start with a review of these tools and take a look at what we can do to improve the accessibility of our documentation. And thank you, Raji, for driving this effort. Yeah, it's really cool. Anything that we can do to open the door to Kubernetes to more folks, I think is really worthwhile and valuable. So thank you.
Thank you. And I do firmly believe that if we make our content accessible, we would have more diverse and more inclusive group. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So I would say let's review let's review these tools and revisit this in 1 week. I know you mentioned earlier, Luke, that's Luke Perkins. And he's not able to be with us this week, so I would say let's defer for 1 week. And revisit. And hopefully this gives us time to review these tools and have a more informed discussion. Okay, moving on to internationalization branching strategy. So we have a working group, which I think right now consists informally of Andrew, myself, and Zach Arnold, with Aaron Krickenberger occasionally putting in guest appearances to lend his technical expertise. So we had originally talked about doing just passing regular commits back and forth between branches, and the content that we're passing from K website out to internationalization repos is sufficiently different from the content that those repos are passing back in return, that just a straight up PR and a strategy of just opening PRs in each other's repos and merging that way seemed pretty straightforward. Zach suggested that we take a look at the subtree strategy to reduce the complexity even more. And the more that I look at, especially like right now, we have 3 internationalization projects open: Korean, Japanese, and Chinese. And the Korean team, they're super far ahead. Their comfort with the tool chain is very high, and the Chinese team, for example, is still struggling with Prow, still trying to find like the right fit and structure for how to do their internationalization work inside of the Kubernetes org. So anything that we can do to reduce barriers for internationalization teams as part of our structure, I think is a good thing. The question of our branching and merging strategy for internationalization is still an open one, I guess, is the TLDR for that. I'm working right now on a prototype of what a subtree setup would actually look like. And the answer so far is that it looks really cool in theory, but getting to looking really cool in practice may be difficult or may be straightforward. That's what today is dedicated to, is getting some sense of how much signal loss occurs between cool in theory and cool in practice. I would say I think like another working group meeting is worthwhile, just because there are some things that would be really good. I think it would be effective. We could bash through really quickly. So I will set up a working group meeting for branching strategy. Again, right now that's just Andrew, me, and Zach, but if you are interested in branching strategy for internationalization repos, even just as a listener, you'd be welcome to come join us. So if you are interested, now, well, actually here, let me just pull, is anyone interested in joining the branching discussion? Brad, you are?
Yeah, at least listening, yeah.
Are you doing Spanish at all? It's just those are the 3 languages focused on, or just general internationalization?
So right now we're focusing, there are no Spanish localization projects in the works, but if you wanted to drive one, congratulations, you found the right group. But the questions that we're answering are going to be broadly applicable to all internationalization projects, because we're talking about the process for internationalization projects as a whole, how they move back and forth between their repos and K websites. So AGV, if you want to do, yes. I can at least send you an invitation.
Yes, I will definitely send the first 3. If I can be of value, I will continue. If I'm not, I will drop off. Yeah.
Awesome. Andrew or Tom, do Andrew or Tom have your contact info?
Yes, I do.
Okay, perfect. And let's see. No, cursors are hard.
You want me to just drop into the notes?
Meeting. Okay. So, and Jim too. Thank you, Jim Angel. Right. So I'd like to add one more thing to our agenda today, and that's to get us talking about quarterly and yearly goals for the SIG. We had our first summit back in May, and it was cool. It was helpful, and it was also, it feels like a lifetime ago in the universe that we live in of just the software cycles. Like, I mean, May is a different geological strata. It feels like. So it feels like if we're going to regularly set priorities and goals as a SIG, that's something that we need to do more frequently. I would say at least on a quarterly basis. So I'd like to revisit this again, have a SIG meeting where we specifically talk about and set our goals and priorities for the coming quarter in December at KubeCon in Seattle. So by a quick show of hands or like a ping in the chat channel, who is planning on being in Seattle? Okay, Tom, Brad, Zach, me, Steve. Jim, are you planning on being there? Svetlana, Raji?
Maybe, not defined yet.
Hope so.
Should be there.
Awesome, Jim. Oh, excellent, Raji. I hope you get it. That's they're usually pretty good about that. Cool. Yeah, so I'd like to focus on having more concrete goals going forward. I think we did a lot of process stuff about who we are, and what we value in May, and I'd really like to focus on specific goals and specific projects in December and going forward after that. So does that, I see folks nodding, but does that sound reasonable? Does that sound like a good idea to folks? Does that sound like worthwhile to invest that kind of work? Any, I guess what counterpoint, what feedback do folks have about that kind of priority setting?
I think it's a great idea, and that I'm kind of in the witness protection program here. Hold on, there we go. I think it's a great idea to have some sort of true north ideas for where we want to go and what we want to work on, because this project, there's so much going for it, but there's so much going on with it that when everybody just does a little bit of everything, it's like adding drops to the ocean, and I think, sorry for the inappropriate metaphor, we want to melt some icebergs. Sorry, we don't want to make global sea levels rise, but you see what I mean. It's like if we focus on a few big things, then we might be able to see some significant changes if we scope those things based on an apparent need that there's evidence for. And so, but then part of that is like, how do we actually do that? We agree that there are a lot of nice things we should do, and we need some kind of structure that results in those things getting done.
I think we're fortunate enough to have a large enough and diverse enough group of people inside of this SIG that it is like, if I were to offer a word, a super SIG, in the sense of like, it's not just people who maintain this one aspect of Kubernetes. Like literally everybody reads the doc. Well, that's not true. A lot of people read docs and a lot of people contribute to the docs, as from my statement from earlier about all the different contributors. So I agree with your point completely, and I would say that maybe the best way to do is kind of the way that Zach has already been sort of steering us, which is working groups, and just kind of have like even if I may be so meta as to declare like sub-SIGs of people who like, we care about tooling and we care about grammar and we care about, these are specific parts of the documentation, and kind of really drive those global efforts, like you were saying, those few big chunks that are well defined, and then push that, see what that looks like after a quarter or a year, and then revisit and
I was going
restructure.
to say, that sounds like an excellent proposal for KubeCon in Seattle. Have an agenda item for precisely how we want to drive work forward. Thank you, Zach, for anticipating where I was going.
And then this larger meeting becomes like a check-in for all those little sub-teams, and each one is reporting their progress on a regular basis, and that way the needle moves.
Sure. And I think doing this kind of work more regularly on a quarterly basis will make those check-ins more functional. Give us the kind of data we need to iterate meaningfully, and also take results back to our respective employers meaningfully. Okay. Anything else that folks want to discuss today? Got about 15 minutes left. If there is something else that is on folks' minds, now would be a good time.
I was curious about the focal bot discussion. So are you moving forward with focal bot, how it works, and are you going to proceed with it or not, just if there are any updates?
So we spoke with Vlad Schlossberg, and I have not turned on any bots personally, but I noticed that other folks have turned on bots in like the Sig Docs channel, Sig Docs tools. So at this point, to be honest, I'm not sure how to turn them off, even if I wanted to. So it appears that we are going forward. What that means in terms of our active participation, I don't think, so one of the things that we clarified is that there's not anything really for us to do as a SIG right now. There's no work that's required of us. So it appears that we are experimental test subjects, and we'll see how it goes.
If I may, as the person who sort of made the unilateral decision, I apologize without talking to anyone first, to invite it to our channel. Part of my thought process from the community meeting and last week when he presented to the wider, broader Kubernetes community was, as a SIG, as sort of briefly outlined earlier, we have interesting pull request guidelines and things and common gotchas that we've all answered for many people before in the Sig Docs channel. It would be nice to be able to offload some of those questions and concerns to a bot, if such a thing could be answered by a bot. So like, hey, I opened a pull request. Nobody's looked at it. Be like, did you open it against 112 release branch? Or something like that.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. Yes, I did catch up with Wald about it. I tried some of the questions in our Sig Docs. For example, how do I contribute? And the bot didn't seem to give the relevant answers. So when I did catch up with Wald offline, he mentioned that we may have to provide the answers and add it there. So yes, we could contribute. If you know of the answers for the questions, please add it to the bot. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Well, and just like Zach's about to say. Go ahead.
Sure. No, I find that I'm not especially pleased by that proposed solution that we do extra work to do the work that we've already done. I am all in favor of participating in a bot experiment that relieves the burden of some of the most common questions, but I still have not received a satisfactory answer about what. So Kubernetes, and indeed all of the work of the Linux Foundation is on open source projects. What is Focal's profit model? Are they taking data that's open right now and funneling it into a model that will consider data proprietary? That hasn't been answered to my satisfaction. I am disinclined by nature. I follow the lazy programmer school of ethics, If there's any possibility that someone will ask me to do something twice, I'll generally try to automate it with code. But I really don't like the idea that we have to provide a bot with answers when they've already been answered to reasonably in our discussion, in our documentation. I would rather that we focus our effort on making the documentation more accessible than making a bot more friendly, especially when we don't control that bot.
Yes, absolutely. Our content should be more searchable and discoverable rather than having a bot which we have to make it searchable and discoverable. Yes, I agree
Which
with that.
Google does a pretty good job of surfacing our docs in Google searches. So
yes, we have a bot who does that already.
yeah. So
Yes.
it's actually pretty easy to kick bots out. We can, I think it's like a, I don't know, do you vote on such a thing? Or I can just go undo my mistake, but basically I can go remove it.
That's, I guess I'm trying to, well, that's, why don't we, I'm struggling in the moment because I don't have a procedural antecedent for how do we vote to kick the bot off the ship.
Especially since somebody unilaterally decided to add it.
So I guess
we could continue to have the bot, but we could use it for answering questions which don't have answers in our doc sets. So for that, we might have to look up our channel discussion all through.
Don't we need to be a little bit careful here? I mean, you know, things get started for perhaps good intentions, but not without, you know, being fully thought out, and then people think, oh, it's official and it's part of the thing, and then, you know, people forget how it really came to be. I mean, we need to be a little bit careful, I think, with these things, because otherwise we end up with legacy stuff and nobody knows why it's there. Does that make any sense?
Yes. So let me pose this in a different way. Is there anyone who is wildly in favor of continuing with Focal in the channels that Sig Docs is in custody? If you are in favor of, let's do simple thumbs up, thumbs down. If you are in favor of Focal, thumbs up. If you are in favor of Focal, thumbs down.
What was the thumbs down? We don't want the bot?
We don't want the bot.
Correct.
I will just play devil's advocate real quick, since
Oh,
I'm
excellent.
building bots for my customers like on a bi-weekly basis now. It does. I loved all your point, Zach, about the lazy protocols. I will say, I just want to plant the seed that if you guys do find that there is a process that you can put stuff in a spreadsheet, and then I'm obviously speaking to coders, so maybe this doesn't work, but if you found that there's a very important thing that needs to be out there that's not in documentation and you want to lazily roll it out, you could just put questions in one column, answers in another, upload those things into a bot, and you're done. I just wanted to say that that's also a possibility. That doesn't mean that that's what you're voting on now, but just for future reference. Yeah, it's pretty easy.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for the counterpoint. Does that change anyone's up or down preference? All right, it doesn't sound like it does.
Yeah, it doesn't change mine, and the reason is that, you know, over time I've come to think that we want one and only one place to provide our information and answers to questions, and that place is the docs. And on all the efforts I've seen over the years to have a second place, you know, like in a console or in Slack, they've fragmented our effort to provide complete information, and they tend to, you know, not get maintained. And so not only do we have two places where there's information, but one or both of those places gets out of date. So I adhere to this idea that we want to concentrate our efforts on one and only one place.
Right.
Also, Zach, please correct me. Are the answers that the bot fetching, is it not from our documentation website?
It is at least partially. There are, I think Vlad explained that there are 3 sources. There's the documentation website, natural language learning from the channels themselves, and Stack Overflow. So we have, and we don't really know what percentage that is. I mean, I think Vlad showed us a diagram of what that looks like, but we don't really have any control over that. And we would also, with Focal, we're also hosting and promulgating content from sites and sources that aren't our docs. So it gets down to what do we want to do? Do we want to do bots that pull information from natural learning and the internet well, or do we want to focus our effort on maintaining our docs well? And given that we struggle sometimes with the resources to take on some of the most pressing projects for our own documentation, this doesn't seem like a wise idea for distribution of energy and resources. Right, Tom's already gone. Thanks, Zach. Yeah, it's not that a bot is completely worthless. We may find a bot valuable, but in this particular instance and iteration of it, I vote no. I vote very clearly no.
Yes, I agree with you. That's my understanding as well. Unless they're able to come up with a bot that would help us maintain just one consistent set of answers and not multiple sources. Right. Yes.
That sounds like a great project to go through the Linux Foundation incubator. So, all right, then let's turn off the bot in all of our channels. I think currently it's just in Sig Docs and Sig Docs tools. But yeah, let's disable that and get it out of there. All right, we've got about 5 minutes left. Anything else anything else from folks? All right, great discussion today, folks. Thank you very much. Have a great week, and see you all next week.
Everyone.